Welcome to the April statewide member call of the California Alliance for Community Energy. As you all know, the mission of the Alliance is to support and defend community choice energy and other local energy development programs in California that advance local clean energy development for environmental, economic, and social justice benefit of our communities. My name is Erica Morgan. I'm a member of the steering committee as well as the operations director for the Alliance. And I represent San Diego from my office here in downtown Little Italy. And in keeping with current practice, I will also say that I use she, her pronouns, and I reside on lands taken from the Kumeyaay people, also known as the Tipayabai people. I'm also pleased to note that I'm now served by a community choice provider. Yay! San Diego Community Energy has been moving us all to their default product. Yay! And I'm also pleased to say that they've just hired a permanent CEO who is a non-utility person and has worked a lot in the green building industry and with energy efficiency. So we have great hopes that she will listen to the community and move us more away from the centralized energy system of the past and toward the decentralized, equitable, accountable, decentralized program that we're looking for in the future, but we'll see. So thank you all for joining us. And as most of you know, I've already done the mission. I don't need to do that again. Our topic this month is obstacles to equity and energy resilience. Our plan for the hour is to invite Jina, our speaker, to begin with her remarks. And so while focused on the technical side of the problem last month, we realized that there are all sorts of other barriers that get in the way, including those placed in front of us in all sorts of institutionalized settings, whether these are in community settings when information isn't widely shared, or informal legislative and regulatory proceedings when the barriers to entry are so high and only certain people can get access, or in grant applications, even when the intent of that granting process is to support community-based organizations. So our speaker this month is Jina Kim from Communities for a Better Environment, who has been actively involved in all of these issues and has firsthand knowledge and appreciation of the barriers and obstacles that we've been discussing. And so I'm going to turn it to Al to introduce Jina. And then Jina, it will be over to you.
Wow, well, Erica, you already introduced Jina. I don't, that's great. So just a little bit of notes. So yeah, thank you, Jina, for coming and sharing some of your thoughts with us. I know Jina because we work together within the context of what's called the Microgrid Equity Coalition. And this is a grouping of parties to a proceeding, the microgrid proceeding at the CPUC, as well as other stakeholder organizations, including the California Alliance for Community Energy. We were there working with other parties that included different organizations to talk about how to bring equity into that proceeding, to make sure that when talking about microgrids and microgrid development, that there were very strong principles of equity involved. And these were largely spurred by the Reclaim Our Power campaign. Mary Rose is on the call, I see, herself, that had put forward in this proceeding important principles and criteria for what a meaningful kind of microgrid program would look like. And so these were taken up in the context of that proceeding, and parties worked together to put together a set of criteria and processes that would apply to any state grant making organization that has an interest in really serving disadvantaged or vulnerable communities. So Gina's going to talk a little bit about some of the outcomes of that work and that effort. Well, I don't know more what you're going to say, but maybe the relevance of this issue more broadly, but I just want to turn it over to you. It's been a pleasure working, and Jina was one of the principal people working on document, which I think she's going to talk about and which we have up on our CACE website. So take it away, Jina. Thank you.
Thanks, Al and Erica. I'm going to try to share my screen. We'll see how this goes. So yeah, thanks to both Al and Erica for the intro. I'm Jina. I'm a lawyer at Communities for a Better Environment, or CBE. It's an environmental justice organization in the Bay Area and the LA area. CBE also represents the California Environmental Justice Alliance, or CEJA, at the California Public Utilities Commission, PUC. And I think Al has probably talked about this in the past, but at the PUC's Microgrids proceeding, CEJA and others have participated as the Microgrid Equity Coalition, like you just mentioned. And we're a group of EJ environmental and clean energy organizations waiting for, bless you, for environmental justice and equity in that proceeding at the PUC. So there's been strength in the diversity of our membership that has allowed us to participate more comprehensively and more effectively in the proceeding. And I'm happy to talk more about that later if you're interested. So in particular, the MEC was formed to participate in shaping the Microgrid Incentive Program at the PUC. Click yes. And I feel like people here might know what that is, but just in case, I'll just say briefly that it's a utility administered program to fund microgrids in disadvantaged communities that are especially impacted by utility power shutoffs. So today I am mostly going to talk about this document that Al has shared with you before, kind of what's in it, what motivated it. So to provide some background, the MEC was a very active participant in all the workshops that took place with the PUC to help inform how the Microgrid Incentive Program should be run. So those workshops discuss things like eligibility criteria, like who or which entity qualifies to get a microgrid funded under the program, or how projects should be scored. So for example, how much weight should a project get if it uses a clean energy source, if it's located in a disadvantaged community, if it would power critical facilities, et cetera. All these somewhat nitty-gritty details that have a big impact on who the program serves and how it's run. So MEC was really active. Mary Rose there, I believe, really active in those workshops. In December of last year, the IOUs released the MIP implementation plan. So Microgrid Incentive Program implementation plan, lots of words, which is what it sounds like. It's the IOU's plan for implementing and administering the Microgrid Incentive Program. And that incorporated many of the suggestions that MEC had made in workshops, but not all of them. And so in response, we filed a kind of overall guiding document that summarized everything we've been asking for in previous workshops and filings. And then we also noted things that the IOUs had decided on that weren't what we asked for. So at the same time, various funding opportunities for climate resilience and other microgrid adjacent things were being rolled out across the state. And what we realized, well, actually what Al realized was that our recommendations for the MIP very much applied to other state grant programs as well. So we decided to take our summary document for the MIP and to genericize parts of it to be more applicable to grant programs generally. So for example, Mary Rose from ROP, one of the organizations at MEC, submitted the document to the Regional Climate Collaboratives Program recently. And I think there are also other opportunities coming down the pipe. So the document starts with giving a background. It's a really exciting slide, I know, which the background, includes how California's budget for climate resilience is creating funding opportunities for clean microgrids in frontline communities, how utility and climate-related shutoffs cause disproportionate harm in frontline communities, and also how energy reliability for these communities can be enhanced with clean energy microgrids. We also name our big picture priorities and concerns. So first, microgrids are important for broader energy resilience in frontline communities where the stakes are especially high from fires or shutoffs that literally threaten people's lives and their ability to sustain themselves. Second sort of bucket of ideas that the grant programs need to enable frontline communities to benefit from microgrid development. So that includes being designed in such a way that communities can access the program at a viable community-based project applications. And also that the microgrid should be clean. So polluting resources, of course, would worsen air pollution, already the worst in frontline communities. And backup diesel generation, unfortunately, has been increasing across California in response to PSPS events and other outages. And so we make it clear that we reject false short-term solutions that perpetuate the disproportionate health and climate impacts of dirty fuels. And finally, we ground our work in ROP's principles for microgrid development, which are shown here. Sorry, I know there's a lot of text here for a slide, and I apologize for that, but I didn't want to give short shrift to any of the content. So I've bolded the first part of each one, which begins to encapsulate the main ideas, but I definitely encourage you to take a look. Well, I was going to say at this slide, but maybe you don't have access to the slide, but it's also in the document if you want to look a little more deeply. So the first sentence of each point, invest in disadvantaged communities. Critical facilities should be defined by the public. So for example, this was an issue because potentially community valued facilities were being left out. They weren't being defined by agencies as a critical facility, whereas government valued facilities that community does not necessarily value were potentially included. Prisons was an example that we grappled with during this proceeding. Encourage community development with a new microgrid tariff. Clean microgrids, not dirty, which I alluded to a little bit. And then provide opportunities for community ownership, which I think is overall our larger vision. So the proposed grant program criteria and process that we laid out in this document has the following 6 main elements. So I'll just list them. 1, outreach and community participation. 2, eligibility. 3, application process. 4, application evaluation and scoring. 5, availability of funds. And 6, grant program evaluation. And I just want to give a few details about each one to help demonstrate the kind of things that we're concerned about in the implementation of these grant programs. And then I think we can open it up for discussion. So first, outreach and community participation. We really wanted to provide some specific details for how to proactively incorporate community-based feedback. So examples, engage community-based organizations or CBOs and community members upfront in the design of the program. So this was really important. So that the idea is not that, the agency or the utility or whoever just comes up with the program and then expects CBOs to do the outreach work for them and just, do your work for you in a sense, and just implement something that they do not have any engagement with or any participation in. So this is really saying upfront, like starting from how the program is designed, there needs to be CBO engagement and participation, and there needs to be real decision-making power. Also raising awareness of and providing information on the program that reaches target communities. This includes things like spoken and written language access, having things that or holding events at hours that people can make, if they work full-time, etc. And importantly, connecting them to other related programs for which they're eligible. So we know that, let's say there are lots of different state programs. Say a community tries to apply for one, they don't meet the eligibility criteria for that one, but they do for all these other ones. Ideally, these are all state programs. The person who's working on program 1 can point you to program 2 and say, I think you'd be a good fit for this one. This helps so that communities aren't necessarily just almost doing like this whack-a-mole thing of trying to pin down various programs that are siloed in different agencies. Next, provide opportunities and resources for CBOs to engage with funding agencies to explore project ideas to meet community needs. That's kind of making sure there's a point person at the agency or the program who CBOs can talk to, and making sure that there's adequate staff capacity to provide ongoing support with the projects. Next, adequate compensation, caps lock. It's the persistent ask from CBOs, adequately compensating CBOs to conduct outreach and otherwise participate in program development and implementation. They're often not compensated the same way that independent consultants are, and there's no reason for that. This work requires not just your standard billable time, but also less tangible resources that come from years of trust and relationship building activities that CBOs do. They should be fully and justly compensated for their work and expertise. Pretty simple, I think. And finally, targeting communications that don't rely on city or county government. This is important because many government agencies have historically failed to represent the interests of frontline communities. And the second element, eligibility, sort of the main idea here is that we felt it was important to allow as much flexibility as possible in eligibility requirements. So we're not too restrictive at the front end. Otherwise, we're already kind of gatekeeping and creating conditions for better resource communities and projects to move forward in the application process. And in addition to broad, relatively generous eligibility requirements, we wanted to use a scoring system that ensures that incentives go to projects that deliver community benefits where they're most needed, which I'll talk about in a little bit. So we proposed the following eligibility criteria. One, that the project includes at least one critical community service. You can imagine schools, hospitals, community centers, etc. Two, that there's a demonstration of community support. We specifically want to include CBO support as an option and not necessarily local government support. The reason I mentioned earlier, there was a possibility that was floated about needing to get a letter of support from the local government. We were like, that's fine, but that shouldn't be a requirement. Again, because of reasons I mentioned earlier. Three, that the project beneficiaries can include at least one vulnerable population. And there were a variety of ways that we could do that. So examples given are, particular CalEnviro percentiles, tribal communities, etc. And finally, enhanced resilience. So meaning that the project provides at least one type of emergency service, cooling shelters, emergency medical support, food and water distribution, etc. We specifically did not want past outages to be an eligibility criterion because it's an imperfect predictor for future outages. And we also didn't want an unreasonable minimum length of duration. So for example, a requirement that the microgrid can island for a minimum of 96 hours or something. We were afraid that would encourage fossil fuel-based microgrids. But this kind of stuff could be included in scoring a project, which I'll talk about very shortly. So third element is the application process. Having a fair application process. In particular, we recommended an application that's accessible to frontline communities in the following ways. So first, that it's accessible to communities and CBOs who are motivated. So basically, if you want to do it, you're able to do it. Ideally, there'd be a one-stop shop for information about feasible project types and locations. A two-step application process. So this would entail like a concept proposal that community applicants can get feedback on, and then they can incorporate the suggestions from the program administrators into their complete application. So sort of setting them up for success. Technical support and funding for completing a full application, which I will also talk about in a little more detail. Multiple application windows so that shovel-ready projects can go forward, but also so there's space for project development in communities that may not have a project ready right this moment. And finally, that the selection process be reviewed by an appropriate advisory committee. So for example, something like the PUC's Disadvantaged Community Advisory Group. Okay, the fourth element is application, evaluation, and scoring. This section is probably the most extensive and specific. So I would definitely recommend checking out the proposal itself if you're interested in the details. But here I've just provided the weightings that we recommended, and we can talk a little bit more about that as well as a group. So I'm not just reciting everything at you, but I'll name the categories that we were considering. So first is project beneficiaries, of course. So which vulnerable communities will use the project in the event of an outage? There's project location. What does the neighboring community look like? We want to consider things like outages, grid reliability or unreliability, disadvantaged communities, low-income customers, etc. the project facility / customer. So this would be, is the customer of the microgrid a provider of critical community services? Is there existing backup generation? Somewhat relatedly, facility emergency services. So in the event of an outage or emergency, what emergency services will the facility provide, or the facility powered by the project? This next one is a little more complicated, ratepayer cost effectiveness. So we had a standard cost effectiveness test with boosters to reflect additional community value, replicability, upgrades to aging or failing infrastructure. But the MIP specifically required a cost effectiveness criterion, which is why we included this, but we also wanted it to be viewed in a more holistic way than just a very, standard benefit cost type test. But we're concerned that a lot of the cost effectiveness scores could potentially deprioritize really important and necessary projects that are also expensive because they're in really disinvested and under-resourced communities. So MEC thought this one was optional. It was just a requirement for the PUC proceeding. And then finally, additional quantitative criterion, person services provided. So that would be things like, how many people can the facility simultaneously provide emergency medical support to, or food and water, or electricity? That's just an additional score criterion. 5, the fifth element, the availability of funds. The most important thing here is that we wanted upfront financial support for technical assistance needed to complete grant applications. So I kind of alluded to this earlier. The IOUs had basically suggested, I would say, a reimbursement style technical assistance grant, where you basically pay for everything yourself, submit your application, and if they determine that you satisfied all the eligibility criteria with your application, then they cut you a check or something like that. And we were like, that's kind of an absurd setup, and an applicant very well may not have the funding to pay up front for technical assistance in the first place. So we really wanted that funding to be upfront, sort of have a low barrier to get that funding so that groups can actually use that to put together the application. And the final implementation plan hasn't come out, at least as of yesterday, and it's supposed to come out any day now. So we'll see if hopefully they might have changed this. And yeah, the last element was grant program evaluation. We want to ensure effective evaluation of the grant program throughout the entire process. So that includes, these are just examples. There are lots of different ways to evaluate. But, some of the things we wanted to know about are things like how many low-income customers have been served by the microgrid, how many critical facilities were served, maybe how many fossil fuel backup generators were taken offline, or how much emissions were reduced because of the microgrid. So yeah, that's just an overview of the document and what MEC has been recommending and proposing to the PUC and other state grant programs. And we're really hoping to improve community engagement and access to these programs while contributing to tangible improvements in resilience in frontline communities. And I'm happy to answer questions and to discuss more. Thanks.
Thank you, Gina. I have been collecting a lot of questions in the chat, and I'm going to invite people to continue to add them. This overview you've presented has been very helpful, and that I think you've done so in a way that highlights a lot of the needs of local communities, community-based organizations that make it both challenging for them to apply and then essential and supported for them to do so in the context of these recommendations. I wanted to invite another member of the Microgrid Equity Coalition, who was also involved in the discussions about all of these, to offer any thoughts and observations both on the specific recommendations and then on the general conditions that give rise to those. And that would be Mary Rose Taruc. Mary Rose, if you are willing, I would love to unmute you and ask you to make your comments. Let's see, where are you on my list here? Or let you unmute yourself. There you go.
I had the power.
You have the power.
Thank you, Erica. Hi, everybody. Mary Rose here out of Oakland, Ohlone Territory. Thank you, Gina, for that presentation. I hadn't seen the the slides to encapsulate almost, I guess, a year and a half of work by the Microgrid Equity Coalition. So it was really great to see them in more simplified, like easy to follow ways. I wanted to lift up the one around the coalition, the Microgrid Equity Coalition. I think in working together to come up with this this recommendation around how to make microgrids more accessible, this grant program to be more accessible to the most vulnerable and disadvantaged communities. It took a combination of folks on the ground, so environmental justice groups like CBE, folks within SEHA, folks within Reclaim Our Power in areas that have been affected by fires and shutoffs, coupled with environmental and energy groups who are more familiar with how microgrids are built now. And the marrying of those two sides, it was just like, it was really great. And then coming up with this product or this proposal about how it would be useful for this particular microgrid incentive program, but also other programs, whether they're microgrids or energy in general, or projects in general, where we're trying to move funding and support for environmental justice communities to be able to help them build up their resilience through the climate crisis. And so, yeah, like the technical information that folks had in one part of the coalition, and then it's just like, well, if that's how things have been working, you know, but this is what we need from the ground, from the communities that need it. And so, yeah, so it was great to pull those together. And again, the theme of today and the last CAC webinar around overcoming barriers to getting these microgrids and these types of technologies to frontline and environmental justice communities is about, you know, it's not that they've never been done before, it's that there are barriers to doing that equitably. And so this proposal from the Microgrid Equity Coalition does bring to light, it's like, yeah, you can assign $200 million to a program, but what are the chances of frontline communities being able to apply to that? There are barriers already that exist. And so what Jina showed in the slides from the coalition is just like, well, you have to do outreach first, because the reason why communities are disadvantaged, there's all these barriers to that. It's not like we have shovel ready projects already to get to, you know, to apply to a program. Just because you assign money doesn't mean we're going to be ready to apply for that. And so there has to be this work to lift up the communities who haven't been able to, organizations, entities who haven't been able to take advantage of these programs in the past. And for those who don't come from disadvantaged communities, those who are not folks of color, Black, Indigenous people of color, those who are not low income, those who don't live in the most polluted parts of California, like there's reasons to dismantle the things that keep us disadvantaged. And this brings to light at least one way of tackling that disadvantage through a grant program, where it's just like, you have to reach out to communities. You have to make sure that the application process is easy to fill out. You have to make sure the criteria is actually about the benefit to a community and not just a cost, you know, benefit, et cetera, et cetera. So I'm really glad that Jina and CBE and SEHA were able to put this in a format that was easy to follow and understand. Thank you. Oh, and I'm going to put in the link, the letter again from the Reclaim Our Power folks around what we wanted to see out of the microgrid proceeding at the CPUC.
Great. Thank you very much, Mary Rose. And again, thank you, Gina. Okay.
Thanks.
Thanks again, all of you. And I look forward to seeing you next month. We will cancel the recording and adjourn the call.
Thanks all.